Of course, it is Tech Talk with TMC. Our good friend Robert Braswell is here. I get to say good morning to him. It's always a good time when the Braz is alive and well and not doing radio voices, as sometimes he and I were doing this morning as Ray was getting us all kind of set up. You guys know Robert Braswell. How could you not? It's always good to have the executive director of ATA's Technology and Maintenance Council. And as always, he's here and he's brought a friend. Good morning, Robert.
Well, good morning, Jimmy Mack. It's always good to be alive anywhere, quite frankly. So, but thanks for the warm welcome. And as you say, well, today we do have a special guest on the program today. He's actually one of the guests that first started with Tech Talk with TMC before it was a segment on Radio Nemo, or back then Dave Nemo Entertainment. And that's Tom Cuthbertson, who is the retired vice president of regulatory compliance back when he was with Omnitrax. Tom is a longtime member of TMC. He's a former council chairman of associates, and he's a recipient of our highest honor at the council. That's the Silver Spark Plug. Today, we take a break from the greasing gears and instead engage in a regulatory roundup, as we'll be discussing with Tom what's new in the wonderful world of truck regulations. These are some of the things that we feel you need to know about as drivers as we head into the final months of 2025. But before we get started, Jimmy Mack, as you know, each week we like to make a special offer available to our listeners. This week we are offering, once again, our PMI, Preventive Maintenance Inspection Manual for Technicians. Pretty popular offering. We give it for the special price of just $25 plus shipping and handling. It's pretty much a comprehensive document on everything you need to know what goes into a good A, B, or CPM. And you can order it by calling us at 703-838 1763, or just go ahead and shoot us an email at tmc@trucking.org. Mention Radio Nemo. You can get it today for that special price. Also, what's more, if you're an owner operator or a small fleet, you got 100 or fewer power units, you can always join TMC for the discounted annual dues of just $150. And do that, you're going to get our 2-volume recommended practices along with many other good benefits. So please do call that same number, 703-838 1763, if you'd like to join us. And of course, we always remind our listeners at the top of the program that any recommended practices we might discuss reflect the consensus of our members. We offer them as recommendations only, and everyone must first determine for themselves if they are safe and appropriate for their operation. Please remember that TMC doesn't endorse any product, person, or service. And the opinions expressed on this show are those of the individual and not necessarily the opinion of his or her company, nor TMC, unless stated otherwise. And with all that out of the way, please welcome to the program, Tom Cuthbertson. Good morning, Tom.
Hi, it's great to be here. How is everybody doing?
Doing great. Glad to have you on the program.
Thanks.
So, we were talking a little bit before the break about, all the things that are happening right now in the regulatory world. Seems like there's a lot of activity going on right now. And a lot of this is affecting, of course, the driving populace that listens to this program. One of the things I think that's a pretty big deal that just came down out of the new administration was a change in the D-rate regulations as it pertains to proper levels of diesel exhaust fluid. That's a pretty big change from what it was, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's I think it was about August 12th that the head of the EPA came out with new D-rate requirements because this regulation has been in place for something like 15 years. And when we run out of that diesel exhaust fluid for NOx, it just derates the engine. It makes it very difficult to operate because you're at such a low operation rate on that vehicle.
5 miles an hour.
Really, yeah, that's right. But what happened was that they came out with this set of guidance. They were working with the OEMs, the engine manufacturers associations, and many of those groups. This is going to be there's not going to be any separate EPA approvals beyond the requirements in the guidance letter. So what some of the guidance tables that they published say that under this new guidance for heavy-duty trucks, if a fault's detected, only a warning light will appear for 650 miles or the first 10 hours of operation. So
right.
At that point, there's not going to be any performance impact for at least a work day. So it won't inhibit loads from being delivered or picking up on your next load or any of the operations for that period of time. So once you reach that, there's another D-rate level. So at that point, the D-rate will be reduced by 15%, not the normal that it had been. But it's not to limit the speed. And that at that point, it should allow the truck to operate normally for up to 4,200 miles for about 2 weeks. And that depends on the fleet and their length of haul. So, and that at that point, there could be a 30% torque reduction. So,
and you might notice that.
Yeah, you would notice the 30. You might not notice the 15 because you might not have a speed reduction. But when you hit a 30% torque reduction, now you got problem issues. So, and I think what they're looking at is within a 2-week period, you should be able to rectify your DEF requirements in that vehicle, right? So the way the final one is, you're down to 25 miles per hour, so that's at about 8,400 miles or 160 hours, so about 4 weeks. So those are the published ones that Zeldin said was going to come out, right? Before, you had 4 hours, 5 miles per hour. You were dead in the water. You couldn't do anything. So I think this is a big move, a good move for the industry. And the fact that he's making it a guidance letter for manufacturers to follow, and everybody seems to be in agreement on that page. I haven't seen any NOx emission rules are not going to be affected in the recent proposal to add greenhouse gas emission regulation. But, and I think the EPA recognizes that the current rates are just unacceptable. And they're also, I think there'd be a safety problem with this whole thing. You got a truck going on the road, it loses DEF, and all of a sudden you're operating at 25 miles an hour or 5 miles per hour less. That causes safety issues in my mind.
And also it could be not the fact that you have adulterated DEF or maybe you don't have enough DEF, but you could have a sensor that's gone wrong and therefore you would trigger a derate when really there's no issue. And we just did a survey on a component service life, top of the list when it comes to expected versus realized component service life. Right. NOx sensor, DEF tank, doser. Those are the ones that were only getting about 30% of the fleet's expected life. So, it's not exactly as if they're trouble-free systems. They still have issues with these. It's gotten better over the last 15 years since it started, but it's still problematic, and it probably will really allow the fleet to be more flexible. And still, everybody wants to get this stuff checked because, it's going to affect your fuel economy, right? I mean, you don't want to have, and nobody wants to pollute the environment, but you also want to have good fuel economy. You need all of this for that equation.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And as we well know, sensors are sensors. Sensors don't have a lifetime of 10 to 15 years all the time. Sensors just go. And sometimes you have infantile issues with sensors early on in their life cycle.
Absolutely. So, this is a little bit of good regulatory news. Thought we'd start off with a good one. It's usually a lot of the news is always doom and gloom. And this time is a little bit of sunshine that comes to this environmental regulation package. So that's really good news. And of course, you mentioned it's guidelines, but it still has the force of law. Is that right?
Right. It's supposed. They're not going to issue a whole regulation. The way that the director put it out is that this letter, there'll be the letter with the published guidelines, and that's what the agreement is to follow. So I don't think it's going to go through all that long-term process because this letter has been published for what the new standards will be.
So starting with model year 2027, all new on-road trucks are going to be engineered to comply with these updated guidelines. And then the existing vehicles will need to be retrofitted. They'll probably do a flash, either bring you into the shop at the next PM, flash the EC, or maybe do some over-the-air reprogramming if you have that capability. So you could maybe start, enjoying this change pretty soon.
Yeah. That over-the-air upgrade has been there for some years. Some people will want to just do it while the truck's under maintenance and do the flash then. But, if you don't reach a truck, then you have that ability to do it over the air. But it'll be all software changes, not new sensors. And from what I understand, it's not new sensors and new components.
Right. It's all in the software. Let's shift gears a little bit, talk about another interesting regulatory development. I understand that the motor carrier numbers are being discontinued.
Yeah, there's a whole thing with the FMCSA now trying to streamline registrations and streamline processes that a lot of people over the years have thought were cumbersome. Because, as you well know, the MC number is there for motor carrier identification as well as the TOT number. So the Federal Carrier Administration is phasing out the motor carrier numbers in favor of UST, and that's going to be the sole identifier for the motor carrier. So this change is supposed to take effect October 1st of this year. So this is one of the transitions I thought was pretty quick to go through this process and make that determination. And I think it's going to help some of the carriers, because when you change vehicles out, you have to post the MC number as well as the DOT number on there, and that takes time. So I think there's a benefit for it, easier for roadside for identification, right? And all the systems within FMCSA.
Absolutely. And there's talk about, coming up with a new identifier, right? They're looking at a new identifier for individual units beyond the VIN number, I've heard.
Yep.
So, this is a little bit of a change. Practically speaking, is you'll just be using a different identifier for your so-called paperwork, whether it's electronic or otherwise.
Right. And you're filling out two sets of forms to get this done anyway, so that for new entrances or new vehicles, you don't have to worry about that MC number. So I think that's a positive thing for the carriers.
Wow, two rays of sunshine in a row. We're doing really well here. Let's stick with FMCSA and talk a little bit about a pilot that's coming up.
Yeah, so there's been, since they changed the regulations some years ago on sleeper berth and the way they have the 30-minute break opportunity, there's been a lot of pushback from, different segments within the industry that says, this is silly. I've worked quite a bit with regulatory in Canada, especially on the ELD task force up there. And the split sleeper berth up there has always been much more flexible. So what this pilot on the split sleeper berth would happen is that they're going to put out a pilot. Right now it's 7 and 3, 8 and 2 is your split sleeper berth. But they're going to add in this pilot a 5 and 5 and 6 and 4 split, which gives much more flexibility to the use of sleeper berth. There's not a lot of details on the pilot yet of what's going to happen, but in previous pilots that I've seen and been engaged with FMCSA, they may have the drivers wear, kind of one of these smartwatches where they can regulate, or not regulate, but check their sleep cycles, pulse ratings, something like things of that nature, to see that the driver's still getting substantial sleep, and he's getting, because there's 3 different measurements on deep sleep, different types of sleep cycles that I think would be measured during this pilot. Another thing within this pilot is that they're going to look at several options, I think, with this 30-minute break. Because what it initially came out was that after you were on 8 hours of on duty, you had to take a 30-minute break. But it couldn't be on duty. And then they've changed that. So now it's after 8 hours of driving time accumulated, you had to take a 30-minute break. But it could be on or off duty as long as you weren't in a drive cycle. So they're going to be testing that in these 2 pilots coming forward. I don't have a date right now as to when they're supposed to start, but they typically publish a formal date. They get a sample of somewhere between 250 to 500 vehicles to run these things. And then they start they publish what the measurement criteria will be. So I'm just expounding on what I've seen in the past and how it's worked. Okay.
So typically, how do they solicit drivers or fleets for a pilot like this?
Well, they'll put out some criteria on what they want. They're going to probably check different brake issues, whether it's short haul or long haul fleets. But with the split sleeper berth, they're definitely going to look for long haul fleets, and they're going to want to interview and talk to people and see what their load patterns are and things of that nature. That's what I've seen in the past on how they determine who they want to run these pilots.
Is there any possibility they'll have to reprogram the ELDs or anything like that during the pilot? Or is this something like you mentioned that
Well,
you wear a smartwatch or something? Maybe it's a separate device. How
yeah.
would that work?
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing with the ELD, right? The ELD doesn't require the slip any restrictions on hours of service. The ELD requires measuring on-duty, off-duty, drive time, and sleeper berth, just measurements. And the only thing that comes automatic is the drive segments. Everything else is controlled by the driver. So I think in many of the larger, highly populated ELDs, they put in the background warnings for drivers on this split sleeper berth. So they may look for an ELD that measures split sleeper berth with warnings and alerts and ask them to reprogram the regulatory side of it, which is not a hard requirement. It's there to assist the carriers and the drivers with their hours of service management. So they may want somebody to make a slight modification to measure the 5 and 5 and the 6 and 4, because many of the big LG suppliers already measured a split sleeper berth between 8 and 2 and 7 and 3 now.
You're listening to Tech Talk with TMC. We're here with Tom Cuthbertson. We're doing a regulatory roundup on some of the changes that you'll be seeing as we head into the second half of 2025. Sticking with ELDs, Tom, ELD registrations. Wow, I didn't realize there were over 1,000 active devices on that FMCSA ELD list.
Yeah. It's up there in public domain. Anybody can go look at this list. But I did a quick snapshot of this over the last week or so, and there was 1,029 active devices on the ELD list. There were 290 ELDs on the revoked list, of which 55 were revoked by FMCSA. The remainder were self-revoked for various reasons. It could have been out of business, they dropped the product or replaced the product with the newer improved version. What I found really interesting in the document, though, because I was responsible for registering devices during my OmniTrax days and
Right.
understand the registration process and what you have to submit. What I found interesting was that there were 332 devices that didn't have any identification on the table about the eRODS transfer. So there's two different ways to transfer eRODS. One is by email and web services. That's the telematics approach. And the other one is by Bluetooth or USB stick. So before, it was definite. You had to put it in and it would show up in the table and it would say brand XYZ is doing the telematics transfer of web services and email. And there actually is 5 or 6 devices out there that are defined that only use Bluetooth or USB transfer. So I found it pretty strange that there were that many out of 1,029 that on the table had no designation for the transfer of eRODS.
Really?
That would, I'm not, it's not imagined. It's there. I looked at it. So I'm probably going to take a deeper dive and check some web pages out and see the links for their services and stuff. I'm just curious at what I may find there. But early on, you would never see that. You would always see a designation in that column.
When you get more information, we'll have you back on the program and give us an update on that. It is kind of an interesting development.
Yes.
Let's move on. Let's move on to another topic. So, English language requirement for commercial vehicle drivers has been the news of late.
Yeah. So, as you may remember, I was on the CVSA Driver Traffic Enforcement Committee for probably about 12 years. And, we've had discussions about this English language in the past, both at ATA and CVSA. And there was always an issue about enforcing this because in the regulation language, in the CDL regulation language, there was not a requirement for English proficiency. But on the driver roadside inspection language I'm generalizing here, by the way, is there was the requirement that was a command of the English language to be able to communicate, read road signs, things of that nature. But because they were in conflict, it was difficult to put criteria at roadside. When you do a roadside inspection, do you put them out of service? How do you measure it? What's the criteria to measure it? So as of June 25th, and this, I guess it evolved from the spring meeting of CVSA, and FMCSA is always in attendance there. They identified the vehicle, the regulation language, but they identified that there's FMCSA published guidance and there were service bulletins issued by CVSA to the states establishing the criteria for roadside inspections. And that would possibly put the driver out of service should they not meet this criteria. This thing is, to me, is one of the fastest things I've ever seen issued out of FMCSA. They pumped it out. And I know there was a lot of discussions on how do you implement this and what's the guidance, but they thought they put together, and currently there's a major accident being investigated in Florida that they think could have been caused by lack of English language knowledge. So I think this is a good move. Is it going to be difficult to implement sometimes? Yeah, it'll take time. It's not going to happen magically in a 30-day period, but it's going to be move forward. I think that's a positive thing, and you'll see it.
Certainly, there will be a lot of interesting opinions on how this is implemented and enforced.
I'm sure.
We'll see how that plays out. TMC doesn't get involved in the politics of any of this stuff. We're apolitical, but we're interested in the technical aspects of all of this. So we're gonna follow it for those reasons. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. We have several minutes left. There's a lot of talk out about the regulations changing out in California. There for a while there it was pretty certain the truck makers had worked with CARB to come up with zero emission targets for the foreseeable future. Well, gosh, something called the endangerment finding, which was the legal underpinning of a whole bunch of climate regulations under the Clean Air Act, was overturned. Basically, it was ruled that the EPA just didn't have the authority to regulate carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases. So that endangerment finding has really changed the direction of California's emission strategy, and now the truck makers who have agreed to the levels that they were trying to set for the development of ZEVs, or basically electric vehicles. All that's changed, and everything has really kind of been turned on its ear. What do you think about all of that? It looks like phase 3 or whatever you call it is maybe not going to be implemented as fast as everybody thought.
Yeah, I think ATA did a lot of work on that, and I think they were very successful in trying to make sure everybody understood what the issue was.
I mean, it's very difficult to, part of the problem was you had to sell so many electric vehicles in order to sell diesels. But if you weren't selling the electric vehicles because there wasn't a demand, because in most cases it doesn't meet the use case, right? I mean, they're very expensive up front. They're very, and you may have some savings in maintenance, you may not. It depends on your application. But we're talking about an initial acquisition cost that may be 2, 3, 4 times a regular option of a diesel-powered vehicle. That's hard to overcome. So if you can't sell the EVs, how can you sell the diesel? And in fact, I think it was Oregon where they actually were going to say you can't sell diesels anymore because we don't sell enough EVs. So this kind of all steamrolled into what we're seeing right now.
Right. Well, when you figure out and you look at the infrastructure costs that would be at a carrier yard to have all the charging mechanisms and the amount of power you need to charge up these vehicles, in my mind, they may work for regional fleets anything less than 250 miles. But when you get into anything that's going to be interstate travel, you have problems. And they were I think California was trying to not understand the differences between the tough. If it was a California-based carrier, they were trying to make the rules apply one size fits all, and that's not what can happen. That's not the real world.
And I don't think anybody's opposed to the technology. It just it's not ready for prime time in a lot of the long haul, medium range applications. So maybe this will give us some time to let the technology mature. And maybe when it does come back the second time, kind of like analog brakes did, right? Came out in the 70s in the analog days, Didn't work out at
Right.
all. But when digital ABS came along in the 90s, it was much more robust, much more mature. The industry was ready for it. So, it's not a matter of being opposed to the technology. You just want to be smart about when you adopt it.
Yep. Agree. Good points.
Let's switch back a little bit, back to the FMCSA. One of the things that have been talked about for a long time were speed limiters. I mean, obviously, a lot of fleets use speed limiters through
Yeah.
their electronic programming for a variety of reasons. There was talk about regulating speed limiters. That's kind of gone away.
Yeah. So through some congressional actions, the speed limiter has been taken off the regulatory agenda. I mean, I was on the safety policy committee at ATA for all the MC&E meetings that we have discussions on this. And I think the biggest problem was nobody could agree on what the actual correct speed would be. And there were other groups that said, if you limit the speed on a commercial motor vehicle on interstate highways, there could be other safety issues for the driver, the people around it, and things of that nature that would cause more of a safety issue, more of a concern for the commercial vehicle not being a safe operation. And I have an opinion that I drive Interstate 95 quite a bit, and much of Interstate 95, and I drive it anywhere from, Pennsylvania, all the way down into Carolinas at times, and parts of 95 end up being a racetrack. So I think the only way this would work is let's not just pick on commercial vehicles. Let's talk about something that could be 10 miles or whatever above road speed. I mean, every system out there that has to do with location reporting and mapping and stuff, they have road speed warnings within the device. So if road speed was there and everybody was working on the same basis, I think it might reduce the safety concern. It won't be a popular discussion for me to say this to people, but that's the only way I think it could work. And that's not going to happen too soon. So this regulation is just put to bed. Probably won't be any discussions for this in a long time. And when you look at people that still employ collider kits, and FMCSA came out and reinforced that ELDs will not be required in any vehicle 2000 or earlier with the engine, which is what most glider kits are. Those things would never be able to comprehend that because the ECM wouldn't have that kind of capability in it. So that thing's just put to bed for a good amount of time right now.
And we're just about ready to put this segment to bed of Tech Talk with TMC. We just got about 30 seconds here. Any final thoughts on our regulatory roundup before we sign off for the day?
No, I think what we're going to see over the next 6 months is you're going to see a lot of things coming out. You might even see an NPRM for what they were considering on any regulation changes. The significant rulemakings, they keep changing, and I look at them for interest, but I don't hang my hat on them that's when regulations will come out. But I think with the going forward move to get these regulations simplified, a little bit more flexible, I think you're going to see some things come out. But everybody has, ability with the notice of proposed rulemaking to make comments on how they feel that would be implemented or how safe it would be.
And now we're going to turn it back to the studios there in New Orleans. Thank you so much, Tom, for being on the show. We look forward to having you on the program again real soon.
All right. Well, take care, everyone. Be safe.
Robert, well done as always. It is great to always have the 1002 episode and rolling forward. You sounded terrific today as we began to kind of, tweak and play around with all the systems and stuff we have. Well done, my friend. What do we got coming up next?
Next week, we're going to be talking parts and labor trends with Jack Poster on Tech Talk with TMC.